Hi everyone, welcome back to PRAKASAM tutorials. In this video, we are going to discuss about terminology in probability theory. There are some important terminologies in probability. So that are first one is experiment. And what is experiment? An experiment is a physical action or process whose results or outputs are observed and noted. That is an experiment. Once again, an experiment is a physical action or process whose outcomes or the results are observed and noted. The good examples of the experiments are tossing a coin, getting up in the morning are the good examples of the experiment. There are two types of experiments, so that are deterministic experiment and undeterministic experiment. So deterministic experiment is also called as predictable experiment, and undeterministic experiment is also called as a random experiment or probabilistic experiment. First, we are going to discuss about deterministic experiment definition and with example, and next we are going to discuss about undeterministic definition and with example. An experiment whose outcome can be predicted with certainty prior to the experiment is known as deterministic experiment. Or one more definition of the deterministic experiment or predictable experiment. An experiment whose outcome can be predicted with maximum certainty. With maximum certainty is called deterministic experiment. For example, in the deterministic experiment, in this experiment, regarding the rising of the sun. So regarding the rising of the sun, this is the maximum certainty. It is predicted with maximum certainty. So that is a good example of the deterministic experiment. The outcome of now here in this experiment, the outcome of the experiment going to be conducted tomorrow can be predicted today itself with maximum certainty. So this is the very good example of the deterministic experiment. And one more example, throwing a stone upwards where it is known that the stone will definitely fall to the ground due to the force of gravitation. So these are the examples of deterministic experiment. And next one is undeterministic experiment or random experiment. And what is the deterministic experiment? An experiment whose outcome can be predicted with maximum certainty. So maximum certainty is called as deterministic experiment. And what is the non-deterministic experiment? So random experiment cannot be predicted. The outcome of a random experiment cannot be predicted with certainty. Random experiment is an experiment in which a trial or observation can be repeated many number of times under similar conditions. The outcome of an individual experiment is independent or identically distributed. The outcome of an individual random experiment is not affected by a previous outcome. Okay, so these are different definitions of the undeterministic experiment or random experiment. And the example of the random experiment, an example of a random experiment is rolling a die or tossing of a coin are the good example of a undeterministic experiment. In throwing a die, getting the possible outcome of the experiment or possible outcome of the experiment are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. In throwing a die, we are getting the possible outcome of that experiment is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. That is the outcome of the experiment. Next, one more experiment and one more example of a undeterministic or random experiment. In tossing a coin, getting head or tail is an outcome. And one more example, in drawing two cards from a pack of well shuffled cards, getting of a king card or king card and queen card are the events of the experiment or outcome of the experiment. And that is the definition and examples of a random experiment or undeterministic experiment. And next terminology in probability is sample space. The sample space is a set that consists of all possible outcome of a random experiment. And what is a random experiment? The outcome of a random experiment cannot be predicted with certainty. So that is already discussed in previous. Okay. And what is a sample space? A sample space is a set that consists of all possible outcome of a random experiment. Each outcome is called a sample point. In that sample space experiment, each outcome of the experiment is called as a sample point. And the elements of a sample space, the members or elements of the sample space may be numbers or words or letters or symbols. The sample space for a random experiment is written within curly braces. And the example of the sample space is when a die is tossed, then the outcome of the experiment, the sample space capital S is equal to the possible outcomes of rolling a single die. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are the possible outcome of a experiment rolling a single die. There are two types of sample spaces, that are continuous sample space and deterministic sample space. And what is continuous sample space and what is discrete sample space and what are its examples? And first we are going to discuss about continuous sample space definition with example, and next we are going to discuss about discrete sample space definition with example. If the sample space contains uncountable infinite number of events or outcomes, events are also called as a outcomes. Okay, once again, if the sample space contains uncountable infinite number of events or outcomes, then the sample space is called as continuous sample space. For example, consider an experiment of measuring room temperature from T1 seconds to T2 seconds. Here the sample space S is equal, the sample space is written within the curly brackets. So sample space S is equal to T1 less than capital S less than T2. So this is the example of the continuous sample space. The next one is discrete sample space. And what is the continuous sample space? Sample space contains uncountable infinite number of events. Uncountable. And coming to the discrete sample space, a sample space contains a finite set of events or outcomes. Then it is said to be discrete sample space. The examples of discrete sample space: in tossing a coin, the outcome of the experiment is the sample space S is equal to head and tail. And rolling a die, the outcome of the experiment, the sample space is S is equal rolling a die. The possible outcome of the sample space are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is a discrete sample space. Event. And next terminology is event. What is the event? An outcome or an event is a result of the experiment. Outcome or event is a result of the experiment. The outcome or result of an experiment is known as an event. An event is simply a set of possible outcomes. An event is simply a set of possible outcomes. To be more specific, an event is a subset of the sample space. An event is a subset of the sample space. For example, in tossing a die, getting an even number is an event. So in tossing a die, what are the possible outcome of the experiment? The possible outcome of the experiments are capital S is equal to sample space capital S is equal to 1 to 6. So now here in tossing a die, getting an even number is an event. Okay, that is a subset of the sample space. Getting an even number is a subset of the sample space. So now here let A1 be the event, that event associated with an experiment E1. Now here what is the experiment? Tossing a dice, rolling a die is the experiment. In that experiment, what are the outcome of the experiment? S is equal to 1 to 6. Now here A1 is an getting an even numbers, and what are the even numbers of this outcome of the experiment? 2, 4, 6 are the outcome of the experiment. Okay, so this is the sample space and this is the event. Okay, now here this event A1 is the subset of the sample space capital S. So that is the definition of the event and example of the event. There are some important probability of the events that are impossible event and sure event, simple event, compound event, independent event and dependent event, mutually exclusive events, exhaustive event, complementary events. So these are some important probability events. And what is a simple event? Next one is simple event. Any event consisting of a single point of the sample space. Single point of a sample space. And what is the sample space? The sample space is a set that consists of all possible outcome of a random experiment is called as the sample space. And what is a simple space? Any event consisting of a single point of the sample space is known as simple event or elementary event. A set of events. Okay. So the example of the simple event is or elementary event is, so the sample space S is equal to 56, 78, 96, 54, 89, and the event E is equal to 78. So event capital E is equal to 78 is a simple event or element event, single event. So then the event capital E is a simple event. Next one is mutually exclusive event. Two possible outcomes of an experiment are said to be mutually exclusive events if the occurrence of one outcome prevents the occurrence of other outcome. So that is mutually exclusive event. So the examples of mutually exclusive event. Okay. So before going to the example, so consider two events, capital A and capital B are two events. If two events are mutually exclusive, then the probability of either occurring is probability of event A or event B. So that probability of event A or event B is also written as A union B. Probability of A union B is equal probability of A plus probability of B. For example, if S is equal to rolling a die, so rolling a die, the outcome of the experiment, the sample space S is written as S is equal to 1 to 6, and capital E1 and capital E2 are two events such that event E1 consists of numbers less than 3 and event E2 consists of numbers greater than 4. So that is, so event E1. So in this experiment, so E1 consists of numbers less than 3. So what are the numbers less than 3 in this experiment? 1, comma 2. And what is the second event E2? Numbers greater than 4. So in this experiment, what are the numbers greater than 4? 5, comma 6. So E1 is 1, comma 2 and event E2 is 5, comma 6. So then E1 and E2 are mutually exclusive events. And one more example, in tossing a coin, the events head and tail are mutually exclusive because head and tail cannot happen at the same time. And what is exclusive event? What is exclusive event? A set of events is said to be exclusive. A set of events is said to be exclusive if it includes all the possible events. So that is the meaning of the exclusive. So this is the definition of mutually exclusive event and example. Next one is equally likely event. And what is equally likely events? two or more events are said to be equally likely if there is no reason to expect any one case or any event in the performance to others. That is, every outcome of the experiment has equally likely possible of occurrence are called equally likely event. And one more definition of equally likely event. The events are said to be equally likely if one of them cannot be predicted to happen in performance to any other. For example, in tossing a coin, head or tail are equally likely events. Next one is independent events and dependent events. And what is the independent event and what is the dependent event? So two events, let us consider any two events. So two events are said to be independent if happening or failure. Happening means occurrence, failure means not occurring. So if happening or failure of one event does not affect the happening or failure of other event, then it is known as independent event. If this condition is not satisfied, otherwise the events are said to be dependent event. And the example of independent and dependent event. Okay, before going to the example, the condition of the independent event is if two events, capital A and capital B, are independent event, then the joint probability is probability of A and B, probability of A and B, that A and B is also written as A intersection B. So probability of A intersection B is equal probability of A into probability of B. So two events A and B are said to be statistically independent event. Probability of A intersection B is equal to probability of A and probability of B. And the example of the independent event, if a ball is drawn from a box consisting of number of color balls and replaced before drawing the second ball, the result of second draw is independent of the first draw. However, if the first ball is not replaced, the second draw is dependent on the first draw. That is the example of the independent and dependent event example. And the next event is favorable event. The events which are favorable to a particular event are favorable events. It is the totality of possible outcomes for which specified event occurs. And the example is when a die is rolled getting even numbers. And what are the even numbers of dying a roll? Die is rolled 2, 4, 6 are the getting even numbers or favorable events to the event of getting an even number. Next event is success events and failure events. And what is success event and what is failure event? Events which are favorable to a particular events which are favorable to a particular event of an experiment are called success events, and the remaining events are called with respect to that event. For example, when a die is rolled, the possible outcome of the experiments are 1 to 6. In that experiment, getting 2, 4 or 6 are the success for the event, and success for the events mean that 2, 4, 6 are the getting an even number, and that is that getting an even number is the success of the event. And what are the remaining events? Getting an odd number, that is failure of the event. So this is a good example of the success of the event and failures of the event. Next one is exhaustive events. A set of events is called exhaustive if all the events together consume the entire sample space. So that is exhaustive event. And next one is impossible event and sure event. And what is impossible event? The event pi is called an impossible event. If the probability of occurrence of event is 0, such an event is called an impossible event. And the event capital S is called the sure event. Sure event is also called as a certain event. If the probability of occurrence of an event is 1, it is called sure event. So that is a impossible event and sure event. In other words, okay. In other words, the empty set or the null set pi is an impossible event, and the sample space capital S is a sure event or certain event. The next one is trial. Trial is the single performance of an experiment. So these are some important terminology of the probability theory.